This is a meeting of the Athens Board of Zoning Appeals. The meeting is called to order at this time at 7 p.m. 05. The date is March 11, 2008. The board consists of 5 members and 2 alternates. An alternate takes full part in discussions of the board and becomes a voting member in the absence or conflict of interest of a regular member. Present this evening are board members Roger Gruser, John Golsey, Hector Flores, myself, Muriel Frederick, Betty Hollow, Michelle Draybold, and not yet present, but we're expecting him, Greg Lavelle. Also present are Zoning Administrator Steve Pearson, Paul Eschenbacher, our Acting Secretary, and City Attorney Pat Lang. The board operates according to the following procedure. The chair will name and describe the case. The zoning administrator will cite specifics of the refusal of the case. The appellant or a representative then will state the case for granting the appeal. Testimony next will be taken from those who support granting the appeal, then those who wish to speak in general comment, and those who support denial of the appeal. Following all testimonies, the board will receive concluding remarks from the appellant. Discussion from the floor then will be closed. The board will deliberate and render a decision. Under Athens City Code, Section 2307-03B, the board has the power to grant such variances from the code as will not be contrary to the public interest, so that the spirit of the code shall be observed, public safety and welfare secured, and substantial justice done. Athens City Code requires that variances from the code shall not be granted unless the board makes specific findings of fact based directly on the evidence provided to it that each and every one of the following 6 criteria are met. Practical difficulty or undue hardship. There must exist a practical difficulty or an undue hardship caused by exceptional conditions pertaining to the specific piece of property. Exceptional circumstances. There must exist exceptional circumstances or conditions applying to the property or its intended use that do not in general apply to properties in the same zoning district. Preservation of equal property rights. It must be determined that literal interpretation of the code would deprive the appellant of rights commonly enjoyed by others in the same vicinity, while granting the variance would not convey a special privilege. Minimum variance. It must be determined that the variance is the minimum required to make reasonable use of property. Number 5, the absence of detriment. It must be determined the granting of the variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent properties, nor materially impair the purposes of the code or the public interest. And finally, not of a general nature. The variance sought must not be of a general or recurring nature, such that the situation would more reasonably be handled by changing the law. The board also is empowered to hear and decide applications for conditional use, substitution for non-conforming use, temporary uses, and appeals where it's alleged by the appellant that there's an error in the decision made by the zoning administrator regarding enforcement or interpretation of the code, as well as requests for interpretation of the code. Any person who's aggrieved by the decision of the board may file an appeal to the Court of Common Pleas. Such petition must be filed within 30 days after the mailing of the board's resolution to the appellant. Tonight there are 3 cases on the agenda. Number 0715V for 38 North Court Street, which is zoned B2. The Wasserman Group LLC is the appellant. Number 0804V for 1055 East State Street, which is zoned M. John Valentour for East State Street Development Company is the appellant. And number 08-03 for 11 and 13 West Simpson Avenue, which is zoned B3. 3 Wide Entertainment is the appellant. The board is required by law to take testimony under oath. Anyone wishing to speak, please stand to be sworn. Do you swear that the testimony you will give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do too.
Thank you. This evening, Steve Pearson has a list for anyone who is present to sign in, and if you wish to speak this evening, I'd appreciate it if you just check off after your name And I think you still have it, right? And if you haven't already signed it, it's right there at the table. Trying something new. All right. Our first case this evening is number 0715V for 38 North Court Street. It's zoned B2B, and Wasserman Group LLC is the appellant, requesting a variance. There was a variance previously granted to this address with the condition that any change be reviewed, and this would be a change. All of the people, let's see, who all spoke, the people who were present last time this variance went through were Mr. Goldsby, Mr. Bruiser, Ms. Hollow, Michelle Draybold, and you also, right? Hector. So we've got everyone who was present. So since I did not hear the original case, I am going to simply ask the questions and participate, but all the voting members, the ones who voted last time, will be the ones who will make any decision this time. I think I'm just going to sort of excuse myself from voting on it because I didn't really hear it the first time, nor did I really participate in the second time. So in any case, having said that, Steve, could you go up to the lectern and tell us anything that we need to know?
I can go up there.
You don't need to. You can just stay right there. Okay.
New format. First thing is I'd just like to maybe call a point of order. If there are not 5 voting members, because I understand Ms. Draybold has recused herself from hearing this case,
I'd forgotten.
then you have to offer the appellant the opportunity to continue until the next meeting.
I'll vote on this one.
Just so you might have a little more comfort level on it, the board originally granted a variance. There's been a second case heard based on one of those conditions, and this is a third, essentially a third case. So the information presented in this case will be new.
All right.
Because
then I'm perfectly capable of listening to new information and going with it. I thought it would be helpful for it to be just the ones who had originally decided, but if that can't be, then I'm perfectly happy to continue. So,
right, Ms. Draybold had, on the other 2 proposals, didn't have a conflict. In this particular case, she does.
I see.
For the particular new proposed parking area.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. Let's go ahead then.
Okay. I think as you previously mentioned, Wasserman Group LLC had obtained a variance for 38 North Court Street to allow residential occupancy for 10 tenants, where they only had 3 on-site parking spaces. The variance was granted to allow 7 of the 10 required to be off-site and located at a parking lot at the intersection of North McKinley and Mill Street. That variance was granted with the condition that if there were changed circumstances, Wasserman Group LLC would return to the board for review of the case. Subsequently, there was a proposed change, and that the parking be moved from the corner of North McKinley and Mill Street to the Athens Mobile Machine parking lot on Elliott Street. That case was heard, and that request, essentially to exchange variances, was denied. Now we're at a third case where a third parking area is proposed to be substituted for the one originally granted variance. This proposed parking area is closer than that originally granted variance. The proposal is to have 7 leased parking spaces at Christ the King Church, which is at the intersection of Stewart Street and Mill, as opposed to the original parking that was proposed further east at North McKinley and Mill. This parking is paved, drained, striped, lighted.
Okay.
Does that mean he's dropping the first parking at McKinley and Mill? That was 10 spaces?
No, that was 7.
No, it was
It
7.
was 7. So he's just asking to drop those 7 and come to this closer by.
That's correct.
And that's, okay.
Now,
an improved parking area
yes.
as opposed to unimproved.
Yes, sir. One of the things that happened at, excuse me, at the second appeal Law Director Hunter had passed on to the board through Prosecutor Mike Miller that the original variance would have to be rescinded if this variance was granted. In other words, you couldn't have two variances running on the same piece of property, 38 North Court Street.
That would be basically the same condition as this. If we approve the King, then the other one is null and void.
Well, I believe what will happen is you didn't have to consider rescinding the original variance because the second application was denied. That would be the same case tonight if this application is denied. However, the way I understood Mr. Miller's explanation was that if this variance was granted, you would also have to have a motion, second, and a vote to rescind the first variance on recommendation of the law director.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Anybody else have any other questions for Steve? Then would the representative for the Wasserman Group please step up and state your name and address for the record? Yes, please. And please affirm that you've previously been sworn.
Yes, ma'am, I have. I do swear to tell the truth, the whole truth. Okay. My name is Rick Wasserman. I own the land and property at 38 North Court Street, Athens, Ohio. Address 1296 Vanderhoof Road, Coolville, Ohio. If you'll forgive me, I'm still a little bit confused as to what exactly I'm presenting. What I've come to ask for is for a modification of the existing variance. Essentially, my understanding is once the variance had been issued, I'm essentially under the supervision of the board, and if I request a change of any sort, I have to come back to the board and request that. So I'm not planning to present the entire case again from the beginning, and I hope that would please the board.
That would, and now that Steve has done a very good job of sort of giving it to me in a nutshell what the original case was, and it was, yeah. No, you don't have to do it all over again. Okay,
very well then. I won't take much of your time at all. I'm appearing before you tonight again to request modification for my existing variance 0715V, granted on October 9th of 2007. The existing variance provides for the use of off-site parking approximately 2,200 feet from the proposed development. Now been able to secure some parking that is some 600 feet closer to the building, parking which was unavailable to me at the time that I applied for the original variance. I believe the closer lot serves the interests of my tenants, it serves the interests of the city code, and the interests of the public in general, better than the parking that I'm now permitted to use. And so I'm requesting permission to essentially switch parking to this new lot, which is located, as the code director said, at Christ the King University Parish, the corner of Mill Street and Stewart Street. I believe this modification serves the interest of everyone for the following several reasons. One is quite obviously quite a bit closer. The current distance would be about the equivalent of 2 city blocks from the building. If you were to measure, for instance, from the College Gate to the corner of, say, where the BP station is, that's exactly the same distance that my building will be to the new parking. This lot is lighted, this lot is paved, this lot drains, and this lot is already in use for the purpose for which I propose. There have been a lot of discussion that's already been stipulated about why the development itself is a positive thing and warrants a variance, which I realize is a very high bar to cross. This particular building's second floor is empty and has been so for about 30 years. The fire chief has previously commented in the materials of the original variance that a vacant space is far more likely to suffer a damaging fire than an occupied space. The building currently is not sprinkled, and this development will make it a sprinkled space, making it quite a bit safer than most of the housing that is currently uptown, and also offers, I believe, reduced risk to the adjacent property owners by containing any potential fire. We recently had a fire in a restaurant that some would say is similar to mine, though really I don't think their food is as good. So we should remember that these things can and do in fact happen, and the reduce of a fire risk is not a small consideration. Furthermore, the Athens Comprehensive Plan encourages the development of spaces exactly like this one for mixed-use housing on the second floor and third floor, commercial space on the first floor. And I think that this space is likely to be habited by college students, thereby reducing the burden on the local neighborhoods, and also hopefully slowing the conversion of owner-occupied housing to rental housing. For this reason, this development is supported by the East Side Neighborhood Association. The original packet for the variance in October has a letter from them supporting it. And I think you also received a letter from Leslie Schaller, who was one of the original folks on the Comprehensive Plan Committee, also indicating her support for this. In conclusion, I'll say once again that I don't seek in any way to skirt or subvert the housing code, only to meet its requirements by providing one parking space for every tenant that will inhabit this building, 3 of them on-site, and the other 7 at the closest destination for which I've been able to secure. I would say also, very quickly, that, you know, at the last time I was here in December, I was not successful in getting a modification, and a member of the board at the end of the meeting said to me, you know, don't give up, because I've often seen people go through this process and then find something after a denial that's closer than they originally thought. And I left kind of shaking my head because I knew that I had called every property owner in the area. But when I re-canvassed, I was able to find, you know, that I'd been given some wrong information by one of the people that I had canvassed, and that they were willing to do a long-term lease for parking that included overnight. The key problem seems to be that most people who own parking close to uptown don't want people in their spaces overnight. And so it's very hard to rent for this sort of thing. So most of the publicly available lots and the churches and that sort of thing that are within, say, 500 or 1,000 feet of the building simply will not rent to anyone who's parking there overnight. And that was the problem that I had. So as I said, the parking that I'm now proposing was not available to me in December, but I certainly hope that you'll look favorably upon this request this time. I thank you.
Any
Right.
questions?
How long is the long-term lease?
The current proposed lease that I think you have in a packet is for 8 years with an option for an additional 8 after that.
Thank you.
Give us the address of this new property.
Well, it's just known as I think it's just known as the corner of Mill Street and Stewart Street.
Okay.
You know, that's a good. Hang on a second. Let me just see if the lease actually specifies an
Okay.
address.
That's probably close.
Is that good enough? Okay.
Yeah, this is a parking area behind 2 different buildings. The sanctuary has a Mill Street address. The offices and classrooms have a Stewart Street address.
Okay.
So you could pick either one, I guess, because it's immediately behind both those buildings with 2 separate addresses.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Is there anyone here present who would like to speak in favor of this variance? Or in general, in favor? If you'd come to the podium, please, and state your name and address for the record.
Yeah.
And were you previously sworn?
Say again?
Have you previously been sworn?
I have.
You have. Okay, and your name and address for the record.
My name's William Dials. I live at 24 Fort Street, Athens. We've lived in that home for almost 27 years. I can't add very much to what Mr. Wasserman has said, but if he has met all the conditions of the variance that was granted earlier, and in fact he has improved that situation, it seems to me that this is a win-win situation. We all like to see sturdy old buildings rehabbed, and we hate to see them fall into disrepair. So I think it's a safety thing, and I think it's just a very good thing, and I would urge the board to consider it favorably.
Thank you. Any questions, anybody? Thank you. Is there anyone else present who would like to speak in favor or in general comment?
I believe Mr. Wasserman alluded to an additional letter of support that I just received today,
Yes.
and you should each have a copy of it. It's from
This is the one from Leslie Schaller?
one from Leslie Schaller, who's the business developer for AceNet. It references the comprehensive plan and encourages the board to look favorably on the modification request.
Yes, we have it. We do. I have it in front of me anyway. Everyone else has got it?
we have copies,
Okay.
thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other general comments? Is there? Did you,
I
have you
have not
previously?
been sworn in.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And your name and address for the record, please.
Joan Kornansky, 56 Mound Street. I just have a question. I don't have any objection to the project. I think it meets with some of the ideas that many people have for the city of Athens. But I have a question about the parking, and that is when the church and its facilities need to use those spots, is there going to be any conflict with the spots that are being rented out as opposed to the spaces that they need to use or are required to have for whatever functions they have? And that would be my only question, just so it wouldn't get bogged down in some
I
kind
would
of...
assume that a rented space is a rented space. I mean, he's required to have it be available for rental 24 hours a day, every day, but perhaps when Mr. Wasserman comes back up, because he does have the last, he has the opportunity to speak last, we will make sure we ask him that.
Okay, well, as much as parking for the tenants of the upgraded apartment, second floor upgraded apartment complex, the required parking for the church and its services itself, do those conflict? I mean, is the church required to have X number of parking places?
Well, yes.
Okay. So has anyone checked that out to make sure? This just happened a long time ago once where someone was given a certain amount of places, but then the other business didn't have sufficient parking.
This would be a
And so
problem.
that's my only question.
Okay. Well, perhaps Steve may be able to answer the question, and if not, perhaps Mr. Wasserman will.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you for
you.
bringing it up. Thanks. Is there anything that you can tell us about that, Steve?
Sure. The requirement for a church is one parking spot for every 6 seats in the sanctuary. Now, I'm not a member of Christ the King and don't know how many seats they have, but there's a requirement for one parking spot for every 6 seats. So I
Okay.
I don't know what the total seating
It
is,
may
but it
be
would be
that-
seating divided by 6.
Okay.
Would give you the number of parking spots needed for that. There's a separate for the business offices. It would be one for every 300 square feet of area used. I believe it's one for every 300. Yeah, one for every 300 square feet of floor area. And then for the teaching facilities in the Stewart Street building, it's one parking space for every 17 classroom seats.
Okay.
So-
And would all of those requirements for separate uses at separate times have to be provided at all times?
The tenants have, according to this lease, access to their specific parking spaces 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. So that requires the church to specify which parking spaces belong to
Right.
them. And that was also a requirement of the variance that we gave initially. And
Right.
I'll read
Well,
that to
if
you at
that's,
some
but
point.
that's in, but that, I was sure that was in
It's
there.
in the
But
conditions
whether,
and variance.
are we required, my concern is whether at this point are we supposed to?
I don't think it's this board's place to have to go and check at the
I
church.
wouldn't think so
Maybe
either.
It's probably the code
Responsibility.
office itself needs to check with the church, I assume. It's the church's responsibility and the code office's
Yes,
responsibility.
it's
It's
the
not
church,
our.
okay.
I
Good.
mean, nobody
Yes.
suggested that I go count the seats, and so
Good.
I didn't.
I'm good. I didn't
Yeah.
either, so.
Okay, so.
If you'd like, I can verify the seating and the classroom space, and then let you know if it is.
Well, yeah, after the fact, I think I'm going to assume
We can
that.
put that in as a condition.
We could, that would probably be the conservative thing to do. I would be happy just assuming that the business office of the church knows what its business is, but to be absolutely certain that that's the case, we can add that as a condition.
Okay.
All right. Is there anyone else present who would like to speak in general comment? Or in opposition? And if not, then Mr. Wasserman, would you like to come up and have your final words?
Yeah, I'll just address this last point just real quick. The spaces that I'll be renting would not be newly rented spaces. They're spaces that they're currently renting to other students in the area. And in fact, this actual issue came up in the discussions with Father Marty Holler. And, they have really not all that many spaces in their lot that they actually do rent. There's one particular section of it that they have for that, and the other section is apparently serving all of the functions that they need to serve, and he assured me of that, and I'd be inclined to take the good father as a man of his word. So I think that's covered.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions anyone from the board has? If not, then all discussion from the floor is closed, and I'm ready to hear a motion.
Well, I'm going to assume that we'll proceed the way we did before, when Mr. Miller suggested that you can't really have two variances ahead of you at the same time. And we're not really modifying the first variance, because I understand that Mr. Wasserman was in fact not able to secure those leases. And so I believe that's what his application says. So that really is moot. However, for our own purposes, I think we should see that original variance is rescinded after we deal with seeing if he gets the variance for this new property.
I agree.
And then that would be perfectly clean.
I would, yes.
Okay, so I'm going to make a motion by reading the variance that we used last time, the same motion. So it will say, I move that we grant a variance to 38 North Court Street from Section 2311, Table B, off-street parking requirements to permit residential occupancy of a structure with 3 on-site and 7 off-site parking spaces, where 10 on-site parking spaces are required, and that the 7 off-site parking spaces be located at Christ the King University property, which is at the corner of Christ the King Church, okay,
Mill and Stewart.
at the corner of Mill and Stewart Street, with the condition that they be clearly specified as intended for, provided for, and excluding all others used by appellant's tenants, and with the condition that if these conditions change at all at this particular parking lot, the appellant or the owner of 38 North Court Street would need to return to the board for a rehearing of the case in order to determine if the conditions could otherwise still be met. That's what we said the last time.
Okay, that sounds like it
So,
covers
second.
everything, and it's been moved and seconded. All right. Shall we consider the usual findings then?
Or shall we just vote?
Or are
We
we?
can just vote.
I think
Probably so, because we've heard
Yes,
all that before.
it's all been
It's not
heard.
very different, yeah.
Okay, and I read it, and
Okay.
so didn't hear it before, but I did read the case, so.
Okay.
All right, then, in favor?
yes.
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 No.
I am in favor, so.
Okay.
You're very consistent.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's get a
All right,
new motion
so-
to vacate the variance that we granted to
Yes.
38 North Court Street for parking off-site at, I believe it's 175 Mill Street. Okay.
McKinley and Mill?
Yeah, it was 175 Mill.
$175, okay.
I've got a question.
Yeah,
Are we sure that he wants to
yes.
let
Yes.
us rescind?
He has
Since
no
it's a
option.
conditional,
He
but
could
this
not-
is a conditional
No, it's not
permit we're
conditional.
giving him.
No, it
This
just
is not
has a
conditional.
condition attached to it. It's not
Right.
conditional. It is a variance, unless things should change for him. So.
Which was the same as the previous.
But in
8-year
fact, he
lease.
doesn't even have the spaces at the first property. He was unable
Yeah,
finally
I'm
to lease
aware of
them.
that, I'm just,
So
if
there's no
something
point.
happens to this
He can't
deal
go
here,
back
No,
there
he
because
has-
he can't
then
lease
he's
them.
sunk.
He had the
couldn't get
space
released.
at the first,
He's
comes
more-
back
he's
to the
more
way it
sunk
was
than he
under
currently
construction.
is.
No,
He's
he
no more
says
sunk
right
than he
here
currently
that he
is.
was not, okay, received a variance for remote parking from the building, but has not been able to secure the parking lease he was promised. Okay, so he doesn't have that lease, but just for cleanliness' sake, let's get rid of that variance. He has this one. it's a better deal for him and for his tenants. Let's get rid of the first one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the first one is not really, it's just
let's
messing
take-
things
So
up.
do we have a second for that?
Is there a second?
There's a second.
Okay.
Yes.
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 All right, and so the original variance is rescinded by a vote of 5-0, and the new variance is passed by a vote of 4-1.
Great.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, hello, next.
Our next case, and I thought by this time we would have Greg, but he isn't present, so we'll just continue. Everyone else is prepared to hear this case, right? All right, good. This next case is 0804V. It's for 1055 East State Street, zoned M. John Valentour is presenting for the East State Street Development Company, LLC, who are the appellants. This is, they're requesting a freestanding sign in variance from 230313I for D. On a premise where one freestanding sign is the permitted maximum, I'd like to have a second one. Steve, can you give us the specifics of the refusal, if there's anything more than that?
This, there is an approved sign at this location. The sign that you're seeing in the information is an exact duplication of that sign already permitted. This is at the old McBee site, so it has, and it has two entrance exit points, one on each extreme end of the property. The sign ordinance does allow directional signs. However, they're only allowed to be 3 square feet in area and 3 feet to the top to mark entrance and exit points. So even though you might look at these signs being at the entrance as directional signs, by definition they're not. The problem is you're only allowed one freestanding sign, and this is a request then for a second freestanding sign. Signs aren't very tall. They're more like a monument sign as opposed to what's commonly called a lollipop sign. So these are monument-type signs, lower to the ground, and one to be located at each entrance-exit point. There is two-way traffic at each of those points. They're wide access points to the street. Really, the problem is that there's no allowance for more than one sign. It doesn't matter if you own a third of an acre or you own 30 acres. You're only allowed one freestanding sign. The signs are not nearly as large as might be permitted. The one that was permitted was for just approximately half the size of the sign that could be permitted there, a single sign. The face area could be up to 100 square feet. The one that was permitted was right around 50. Mr. Golsey figures it at 56. So, we're not talking about large signs.
Does anybody have any questions? All right, then we're ready to hear from the appellant.
Yeah. If I might mention too, you do have Mr. Valentour's arguments in favor or in support of the request. I did.
Is for each one of us.
Provide those to you.
Do you want either side? And it says-
Looks very large. It's just low.
Scale.
Large, yeah. We should ask him that.
Guys ready? John Valentour, RVC Architects, and I'm here representing the Stateside Technology Park, formerly the McBee Building on East State Street. And I'm just going to go read through my findings and the reason we're here. You all have a copy up there as well. we request consideration for signage at this property. The site is the former McBee facility at 1055 East State Street. The property currently has two primary entrances, one at the east and one at the west end of the property. We have applied and received a permit for signage at the west entrance already from the city, and are requesting permission to place an identical sign at the east entry of the property. The maximum, well, this is a little different. I thought the maximum allowable sign was 50 square feet.
Yeah, if I could correct that, I was working originally on the 100-foot assumption. There was 4 lanes there.
It's 3.
It's just 3.
So I thought that...
So 50
that
square feet's the maximum, not 100.
in a 3-lane road, 50 feet is the maximum square footage of the sign. That's what the sign we have applied for and received permission for was 50 square feet, and we're asking for an additional 50 square feet at the other end of the property.
But to be exact, I guess that would be 56 square feet, because 48 by, what is it, 168, that comes to about 56
53.
square feet.
Okay.
Right.
50
Okay,
something.
just to be
more.
exact, yeah, okay.
The property has 980 linear feet of street frontage. And I think that something that's important about this site, and that's why I gave you those photographs up there to show you, the property slopes away from East State Street. McBee actually sits downhill from the road. And this situation makes it a little difficult, actually very difficult, to identify the points of entry into the site off of East State Street. The alternative to placing signs at each entry, like we have proposed here, would be to place one in the middle, a double-sided sign. But I don't think, and we did not, the owners think, that this would be the best solution for this building. The signage, because of the right-of-ways and setbacks, will be 40 feet off of the roadway and set at a 45-degree angle. What we're trying to do is help identify where you turn off of East State Street to get onto the property. These signs will have vegetation or landscaping around them and also be externally lit. They will not be internally illuminated signs. And through the findings, the facility is intended to have multiple tenants. And rather than placing the company names on the East State Street signs, directional signage at the junctions of the access roads on the property will lead to a specific tenant. These signs are just intended to have this, I think I gave you a copy of what it was going to look like, Eastside Technology Park, and the address only. And the site plan that I showed you indicates that there's a complex of roads that run around on the property. After you get down off of the main access roads, that's where directional signs would be located towards the individual tenants. And the reason for this is that all the tenants will not be entering off into the main entry of the building. Some of the tenants might have access through side entrances on the property. And so we felt that it would be important to help guide people to where they needed to go once they got off the main road, rather than have their names all set onto the main road itself. The granting of this variance will be in accord with the general purpose and intent of the code. The property has a large street frontage on a 3-lane section of road that is surrounded by 4 lanes. The signage area we are asking for would be acceptable in most of this specific zone. Just this one section has not got a 4-lane. It's a 4-lane down the road, not too far, and it's a 4-lane or it's a 5-lane once you get back into Athens, which would make this size of the signage we were asking for acceptable. The variance will not be injurious to the area or detrimental to public welfare. In fact, in our opinion, it will provide a better defined entrance that will make access to the site safer. Right now, McBee, or it used to be the way McBee was, or Coca-Cola, or the only other real tenants on that area, don't have public really coming in and out of the site. For the most part, it was employees and maybe some salesmen every now and then. With the development of this facility, there's going to be more public access required to the site, And it, I think, would be advantageous to make that as easy and as simple as possible for people to identify where they need to get on and off the road to get into this specific area. And then they can find where they need to go within the complex. The particular circumstances and conditions which make this variance acceptable relate to the design of the original facility, which has two main entries into it. These access roads are at remote ends of the property, and they both drop in elevation off of East State Street, making it difficult to see them. The situation at the site does not apply in general to other properties in the zone. Most of the other properties in the zone adjoin a 4-lane road or more. This property has a 3-lane road, and also the speed limit is increased from the more congested retail areas in the zone, from 25 to 35 miles an hour in front of this property. Denial of the variance will perpetuate an existing poor situation, which can be corrected with minimal impact. Use of the building or property will not be denied, but better public access will be provided. When McBee operated in the facility, very little public access to the site was associated with the operation of the business, as I indicated. Now the facility will have multiple tenants, many of them serving customers, which will need better directional information will be provided, will improve the functioning of this specific property. The hardship that will be created would be related to traffic flow into and out of the property. Public access and directions to the various tenants of the building could be affected by denial of this variance. And based on a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit of the road in front of the building and the distance the sign will be located off of the roadway, 40, I think 44 at one end and 42 at the other feet, the sign of 50 square feet will be appropriate for passing traffic. The sign will not impair the supply of air or light to adjacent properties. Circumstances related to this property, the size of the lot, the number of lanes in the roadway, and the slope of the ground between the roadway and the building create situations which make this request unique to this property and do not confer special privilege. We are asking for a variance based on specific existing site conditions and the specific use of this property. Thank you.
Has anyone questions for Mr. Walter?
I had one. On your picture here, are the red lines to scale, you think, with?
Yes.
Okay.
Those tiny little red lines are the actual size of the sign.
All right.
You had a variance to put a sign up before. You have a sign up now?
No.
Even though you were given permission to put up
We
a
were
sign?
given a permit to put one up at one end of the property.
So there's no signs up on the property?
There's none up there now.
Oh, I noticed there's a big paper thing up on the wall of the
At
front.
McBee, or DHI has put a
Right.
wall sign on
Right.
to identify their location.
That's for one of the occupants of the building.
That's one of the
Yeah,
tenants.
Right. Any other questions? May have some more later, but at this
Pardon?
time, I guess there are no further questions at this
Okay.
time. Thank you. Is there anyone present who would like to speak in favor of this variance? Is there anyone present who would like to speak in general comment or in opposition?
Joan Kernansky, 56 Mound Street. I was listening to this conversation, and although I was out there lately, I didn't look closely at the site. But I just remember the CVS conversation in front of this board, and the CVS requesting additional variances for a larger sign, and the board refused them. And I think part of the idea to maintain some integrity on State Street is to keep within our sign limitations, so we're not looking at a lot of signs. And as that area gets more developed, although right now it would seem like just 2 signs, it may end up being a cluster of signs out there. So I would really like to see the one sign limit applied to this area. And if perhaps the road would get widened to a 4-lane, then a request for a larger sign or 2 signs, 100 square foot sign would be more appropriate. Whereas right now with the 3-lane, it's only 50 square feet. So I would like the board to consider not granting this variance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wanting to speak against the variance? If not, Mr. Valentour, would you like to have pick up your option for to have the final word?
Thank you. I just would like to, I think, for the record, say that for the safety of this property, I think that it would be best if you've ever driven by there and tried to turn off onto the McBee site. It is difficult to see and to turn at the 2 entrances into that property without providing some kind of guidance. It's going to, even if you know where you're supposed to turn, and I've been doing that for some time now, it will be difficult to make that turn.
Because in my previous life, I did have occasion to go out there on a fairly regular basis and did find that locating the drive down over the side there wasn't impossible, but I knew where I was going, and it wasn't after my first visit. But yes, it is more difficult to see.
And I should note, too, that these signs will not be very tall at all. They probably will not even extend above the level of the road by very much. The sign is 4 feet by 14 feet, I think. Mm-hmm. With the concrete base, which, again, on the sloping ground goes from probably 3 feet or 2 feet to 5 feet at the most. So at 9 feet at the low end, 40 feet off the road, which is already tapering off of the East State Street, these signs will not really become a visual nuisance, I don't think, to public access or driving on East State Street. It will be more of a benefit to people that are looking for 1055 East State Street to identify where they need to turn.
So you're saying they're only going to be 4 foot high?
The sign itself is 4 feet tall.
How about the pedestal it's on?
Well, it varies, I think, in size, and the floor plan, or the plan that you have there indicates, I believe, the slope that would be...
okay. So at one point it will be higher than...
It would be higher on the downhill side than the uphill side.
Accommodating the slope.
You had a variance to put 1 sign up. How come you didn't put the 1 sign up?
We didn't get a variance.
No, we have a permit.
He just had a
first sign.
permit.
This hasn't been
You
done
had a
yet.
permit for the first sign.
But that was allowed without coming to us.
The way
Right,
I
so
understand...
Why didn't you put the sign up yet?
Because it would be in the middle of the property and not near the
Well, we have to,
entrances.
I'm not sure exactly what the owners will intend to do. East State Street coming out, or going from the west side would be the more heavily trafficked side coming from Athens going into the property. So if the variance is not granted, we might have to reconsider how to deal with access from
Why didn't they put the
east.
first sign up?
We just got the permit just recently.
Okay. And, never mind.
Anything else? Or anyone else? Done? Okay, thank you. And in that case, then, further comments from the floor are...
One comment, please.
Oh,
The
okay.
face area of a sign is measured by a geometric form that encloses the letters.
Mm-hmm.
So, if, not that anybody's building a monster cabinet with a small sign to try to circumvent the regulations. The measurement standard is measured around the letters itself.
Okay.
So that's why you see, I think there was a reference to the CVS case, for example, and I think I had mentioned at that time that if you took the whole structure that holds the sign up into consideration, there are 2 12-inch steel columns that hold the CVS sign up, for example. So there's 2 of them, 1 foot wide each and 40 feet tall. That would be 80 square feet right there of the 100 allowed. So would you only be allowed to have a 20 square foot sign on top of 2 40 foot wide poles? So the measurement standard is around the letters. So just to kind of clear up the discrepancy between 50 feet or 56 or how high is the base, or how wide is the frame.
Okay. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions about that? Then I think we're ready to close comments from the floor and consider our motion for a variance.
I move we consider granting a variance in case number 08-04V, Zone M, 1055 East State Street, John Valentour, East State Street Development Company, LLC, appellant.
From, you need the rest of the, keep going.
Appellant is requesting a variance from 23.03-13I-4D to permit a second freestanding sign on a premise where one freestanding sign is the permitted maximum.
Do we have a second?
Not yet. Let's insert how large the sign is to be.
Okay.
Approximately 50 square feet.
Can you
Make it 56 to be exact, so there would be no discrepancy.
The sign
That's already
to
in
be
the code.
a maximum of 50 square feet.
56.
He said.
56 square feet.
Okay.
All right, now can we have a second?
Second.
Okay, good. All right, what is the practical difficulty or undue hardship faced?
I keep insisting that we don't always address this first issue properly.
Okay.
The issue is, what is the hardship that would be created by the board that is not necessary to the fulfillment of public purposes if we say
Okay.
no to the variance?
So
So
what is
I
that
see the
hardship?
hardship as it would create a difficulty in identifying the entries, which would create perhaps a safety problem. And further, I think, something that Mr. Valentour did not allude to, I think that Athens is very pleased to have this McBee plant turned into a technology site that promises to be a very valuable entity for the city of Athens. And consequently, I think having such a site that is very difficult to identify would be certainly a hardship, maybe for the town and certainly for the business. I see that as the hardship.
I think that's the hardship he was describing, yes. Well then, what would be the exceptional circumstances applying to this property that doesn't in general apply to properties in the same zone?
It slopes away from the road.
And the 3 lane in that area, just 3
Where
lane.
it closes
Yeah.
down and then opens back out
Yeah.
again. Yeah, were there an additional lane, then he wouldn't have to be
No,
here at all.
right.
Okay. How about property rights? Would a literal interpretation of the code deprive the appellant of rights commonly enjoyed by others in the same vicinity?
Is there anyone else in the same vicinity?
No, not in that 3 lane. Well, the
That's the
pop-
Yeah,
vicinity
there's
we're
other
talking
people
about.
there, but they're not, it's not gonna be a hardship for them.
I
That's
would only
still
say if there were people living across the street where the light might, but I think it's woods across the street.
Pepsi Rocks right across the
Right.
street.
Right, so I
All
don't
right.
think.
Would, is this a minimum variance?
I guess it's just making 2 would be fairly minimum. It's not asking for 5 or 6.
Well,
Well, he's
Nor
asking for
particularly, nor
It's minimal for
high.
the fact that he's dealing with 2 entrances.
Yes.
He's not asking for 3 signs.
All right, on number 5, would granting this variance create a detriment to adjacent properties?
No.
Would it materially impair the purposes of the code or the public interest?
Yes. The code says one side.
Public interest would be safety issues and certainly would enhance the safety of the entrance.
I agree.
Right. The purposes of the code were to, well, my understanding at the time that the code was being worked, the sign code was being worked on, were to reduce sign blight. And it doesn't seem that the signs as presented being sort of,
They look like very tasteful.
they look
And the
and
wording is
small.
directional, it's not commercial. There's
Yeah.
a big difference, I think. in-
Yeah, this is not an advertising sign.
You're right, it's an information.
Okay, all right then. And in general, is this variance that's being sought something general or recurring, such the situation would be addressed to City Council for changing the law?
Pretty unique property.
No, okay, we agreed then. All right, then are we ready to vote? I'll start at this end.
Start here.
Yep.
I'm going to vote yes.
Okay. And
No.
Yes.
Yes.
yes. So on a vote of 4 to 1, we have a variance. All right. That brings us to our third case for the evening, which is a little different than what we normally do, and for which we may have a number of people present who want to speak. If there are a number of people who are wanting to speak, who have not yet signed in,
Everyone's seen this. Have you all seen
Yeah.
I would,
Director, have you seen it?
Thank you.
well, Steve, we do have somebody in the back who hasn't got the, thank you. All right, we're going to be hearing the case this evening, and if there are a number of people who speak, I just wanted to let you know how we generally handle things is to let people just talk as long as they care to. But this evening, if there are going to be a lot of people speaking, we're going to need to follow our rules as they are set up, which is that you please limit your commentary to no more than 2 minutes. And in addition, if someone has already said what you have to say, please just let that stand for you, or stand up and say, I agree, rather than belaboring the issue by saying the same thing over and over again, just so that we can all get home this evening at a reasonable hour. It would be much appreciated by all of your neighbors, I'm sure. All right, then, having said that, case number 0803 for 11 and 13 West Stimson Avenue is zoned B3, and the applicant is 3 White Entertainment. And in accordance with 230407A12 and 230702C, the board this evening will consider if the requested use is a principally permitted use in the zone. And if it is permitted principally, then we would have to determine the number of parking spaces required for the use. We don't do this frequently. As a matter of fact, it's the first time since I've been on the board. But we're going to, this evening, handle it as best we can. So, Steve, could you please reiterate for everyone present the reason that we have to be hearing this evening?
This application was received back in December, and there was great coverage of it, let's say, to know what the activity was going to be that was proposed. The application said that there would be dancing and entertainment without the sale of alcohol. In other words, not a liquor license or sale of alcohol, and 120 fixed seats. So, to give an indication of the use as compared to something in the code, for example, dancing and entertainment is included in the code without definition of what those are. And I'm not sure if that is exactly the type of dancing, entertainment
Anyway,
that was
But just for
Yeah,
the
you
record,
were
intended.
unable to determine whether or not it was stated in the code specifically enough to
Right.
be able to give a permit, so...
Right. This
you referred
particular
to the
use
board.
is not specifically described as something that's principally permitted or specifically prohibited. If that were the case, you'd have to list every possible type of business use, and the zoning code would have to be brought in, by a forklift. So I think that's why, in the framing of the ordinance, there was this allowance for the board to look at things that are just not traditional. And I think the section, if I could read that, the section that you referenced, is under this particular zone, B3. It's listed as number 12 under principally permitted uses. And it does say, as a principally permitted use, other uses other than those, any other use which is determined by the Board of Zoning Appeals to be of the same general character as the above permitted uses, but not including any use which is first permitted in an M zone or which is prohibited in an M zone. So it's neither one of those. It's not an M zone situation. Entertainment, nightclubs, theaters, pool halls, those kinds of things are actually permitted first in the downtown zone, which is a more restrictive zone than this one. And let's see. Eating and drinking places, they're actually first permitted in the B1 zone so long as they serve residents of the neighborhood. So, let me see if there was one other one. Another related situation to this is the determination of the number of parking spaces. Under powers of the board, original jurisdiction, section 230702C says that in the case of a building, structure, or premise, the use of which is not specifically mentioned in 2311, Table B, off-street parking requirements, the board shall determine the amount of parking required. In making this determination, the board shall identify a use from Table B which is similar or comparable in regard to the parking requirement and shall apply those minimum requirements. So, for example,
So is this requirement, he's coming in under dance hall, church, restaurant, what?
So that's what we have to figure out.
right, the application was for dancing and entertainment. Now, in off-street parking requirements, there is a section called dance halls. There is also a section called assembly halls. Those are the two that I can see that might most
So-
closely.
Assembly halls have permanent seating, and dance hall has,
There are actually dance halls and assembly halls without fixed seats. There's one parking requirement. That's one for every 100 square feet of floor area. This other section doesn't say with fixed seats, but I would have to make the assumption that it was, since it specifically talks about without fixed seats in the other section. It mentions assembly halls and then one for every 6 seats. There's really, picking things off of the off-street parking requirements list of things
so
specifically
the off-street parking
permitted.
requirements would be roughly what, 20, 30 seat, 30 parking spaces?
One for 6 fixed seats would be 20 parking spaces required. So 120 spaces divided by 6, 20 parking spaces required, if that was the standard.
If he's going in as a dance hall,
Assembly hall,
assembly hall.
yeah. There is nothing that talks about dance halls with fixed seats.
No, a
Steve,
dance
I
hall
know in
couldn't
the
have fixed seats.
yeah, I know in the past, I guess for a fact, I knew
Dance
that
hall,
there
dance
was
hall
either
doesn't
one or
have
two restaurants
They
that
have to have
they did not have the license for serving alcohol, but they would allow the customers to bring their own alcohol and use it. Could this be possibly a case that, can they possibly allow the customers to bring alcoholic beverage
That's
to serve?
Yeah. I'm not familiar enough with liquor control laws or specific things that do occur to be able to make a good response
That
to
wouldn't
the
even
comment.
concern us, would it?
No.
I think it
Well,
would
it does,
probably.
yeah.
Ultimately,
Let's wait for the
okay,
specifics
we
until
can
get
have
more
our discussion
general.
after we've had our presentation, I guess, from the,
Right.
from the,
Now, I can say
Applicant.
that the zoning code says that eating and drinking places are not permitted within 200 feet of an R1 or R2 zone.
How far is this from an R1 or R2?
Approximately 120 feet.
But aren't there other eating establishments down there that we've wavered?
Not to
There.
my knowledge.
Would it-
Well, there is, under the B3 designations, number 3, which you've alluded to, which is eating and drinking, 200 feet from R1 and R2 zones. And number 6 talks about commercial entertainment. And I'm not exactly sure what that means, except it suggests it's entertainment for which you are making a profit and people would pay to see, do, be a part of. And that has to be 200 feet from any R zone.
Betty, that's just commercial recreation, not
It's
entertainment.
recreation.
And
Commercial recreation.
Okay, so what do we
Not
call?
entertainment.
Okay, what do we call commercial recreation?
I would say could be a variety of like maybe a sports activity or the things that are not something that necessarily not be entertainment.
Let's hold off on this till we close the discussion.
So
Yeah, okay. All right. Steve, we'll probably have other questions for you. But,
And just as you alluded to, too, this is a little different situation than we've ever seen before. You mentioned this the first time, so
It is one
that's
of the-
why I felt more comfortable
Yeah.
referring this to the board to make the determination, because there's nothing really in there to...
yeah. Well, this is one of the things that the
Address
board
this.
is assigned to do, is to determine exactly this sort of thing, where it is not indicated in the code specifically what is permitted in this particular area, trying to determine what is appropriate for the community and that fits with the intentions of the code. So,
Well, I disagree. I think that should have been city council.
well, no, it says in the, well, I have to find the place in the code where it says exactly that, but it does say that this is.
Steve, I
this
have
is
one more
one
question
of our
from your
principally
comments.
permitted directives.
You mentioned something about a more restrictive zone,
Right.
and I assume you were talking about the uptown area?
Yeah, the B2D district.
And so, why would that, more restrictive in what way? What, when you say more
The
restrictive?
uses permitted are fewer,
The
for
uses
example.
permitted are fewer?
Right. There are more uses permitted
City council
in the B3 than there are in the B2D.
Got it.
But one of those things that is permitted in the B2D is entertainment, which it says entertainment, of course, there's no definition, nightclubs, theaters, billiard parlors, pool halls, bowling alleys, and similar enterprises. And then there's the 100-foot separation. So that's why, in particular, I did see this in comparing the 100-foot separation for entertainment that carries over to the B3. I did, actually for this application, and I'm sorry if you didn't receive this pack of information in the mail, but just for that, because entertainment must be, even in the B2D zone, 100 feet away, I measured out 100 feet from the property, and it doesn't touch. In this case, I believe the ordinance says, let me see, I don't know, it says any residential zone. What I had to do then was get a copy of the rezoning of Landmark, because it went from M to R3.
Correct.
And because this 100-foot radius can't touch any residential zone, where the drinking part has to be 200 feet from an R1 or R2, I did draw, make a determination that this property is a little greater than 100 feet away from any residential zone. When Ms. Hollow had mentioned how close is it to the R1 zone, that's on the north side. It's R3 south, R1 north, and it's approximately 120 feet to the R1 zone,
You're talking the backside of those properties is 120 feet.
to the zone line, right? Yeah. The south property line of the R1 houses that are on,
Morris,
no, this is more Montrose and Ondas.
yes, those side streets, yeah.
Right. So it's not any of the rear yards of Montrose and Ondas rear yards, not Morris rear yards.
And you're saying it's 120 feet to the new landmark development?
No, it's less than 100 feet. The distance is greater, yes. The 100-foot radius doesn't touch the landmark property. I mean, you can, if you don't have this, there should be one in the file. And again, I apologize if the package that you got didn't contain it. I can show you this, though, if that's what you'd like to see.
I have a copy in here.
Thank you, Steve.
So the prohibition for anything closer than 100 feet to any residential zone is not violated if the use considered is entertainment.
The bowling alley's back here.
The bowling alley is a grandfathered non-conforming use. You know, as I read it off, remember, it did specifically say bowling alley can't be within 100 feet of, or a pool hall. This building used to contain sticks and stones. Pool hall, so
Steve, on
the
the
pool hall was okay, and the bowling alley's not, according to what exists, the language that exists right now.
on the application form, they have checked off the sign. Aside from the size, is there any restriction on the content of what it could be on the sign, or it could be anything? Aside from the size and height and those other things.
No. Sign ordinances generally need to be content neutral, as long as it's not anything that's offensive.
Okay.
You know, it really doesn't, it just talks about the size of the sign. There used to be a prohibition against telephone numbers on a sign for some reason. When the code was changed in, I think, 2004, telephone numbers were allowed to be put back on signs. I have no idea why they were prohibited, but, you know, before, but they're not now. And so is there anything in the zoning code that regulates what the content of a sign face is? No. No, there isn't. Just the area that it covers.
Okay. I think we're ready to hear from the appellant now. And could you state, please, affirm that you've previously been sworn and your name and address for the record?
I have been previously sworn. My name is Scott Mergenthaler. I am counsel for the applicant in this case. My address is 366 East Broad Street in Columbus, Ohio. The original, I wanted to address a couple things, but first I wanted to thank the board for granting a continuance of this from last month. Due to some circumstances beyond my control, I asked for that, and I appreciate that. The individual applicant is a business to be named Three Wide Entertainment. It's actually a business name of a Mr. Christopher Stotts. He asked me to express his apologies for not being able to be here tonight, either due to his work schedule. This use, we applied for a use as a club and assembly hall, and the description was dancing and entertainment. What Mr. Stotts plans to do at this location is to have an adult entertainment establishment, and that is defined in the code. There will be exotic dancing that will take place inside this establishment. There will be no sale of any alcohol or food for that matter. There may be, would be anticipated that they would have the ability to bring in their own beverages. The actual floor plan is 9,000 square foot. However, only 4,800 square foot of that is going to be used for the public. So there will be 120, up to 120 fixed seats in this use. The remaining 4,200 square feet or something will be taken up by dressing rooms, office, staff rooms, and they are also, their stage is going to be constructed so that there'll be a 6-foot dead zone around. The state law prohibits contact with exotic dancers within a 6-foot radius, so there'll be a stage and then on a 6-foot no contact zone around that stage that we're submitting to the board would not be available for public access or public use. It seems when I look at Athens code, I know that as of December 17th, 2007, there was nothing in the zoning code that would prohibit the use of adult entertainment establishments. The rumor is, as I understand, I have not been able to verify it, that perhaps there is some legislation enacted since that date. However, my opinion, based upon what I believe to be the law, is that that legislation would not affect the board's decision on this particular application. When I read this code, I see a number of definitions that are not, or a bunch of words that in this code that are not defined. And so I'd like to sort of address those with you. As far as an assembly hall goes, we have a lot of definitions in the Athens code, but this one's not one of them. So I just resorted to the dictionary. And an assembly is a company of persons gathered for entertainment. And that's exactly what we're offering in this use. And a hall is just a large room for an assembly. So it seems like the use qualifies as an assembly hall. And as Mr. Pearson's already indicated, with 120 fixed seats in there, we would need 20 parking spaces, and I think there's more than double that amount available for this use. We've also asked for club status. I think the proposed use was deemed a private club, and we could actually make membership a condition of entry into the club, and we would be willing to do that if that fits the board's needs. But club is defined in the code section. See if I can grab that for you. Well, I think they just defined the word club. A building or portion thereof owned or operated by a person for social, literary, political, educational, or recreational purposes for the use of its members. The issue, I think, in this, or I guess what I would ask the board to do in deciding this case is to remain content neutral. Because the issue of whether or not expressive dancing or exotic dancing that's going to be occurring in this is an activity that's been long protected by the First Amendment of the United States and Ohio's Constitution. And to base a decision on this permitted use on the content of what's occurring in there, I believe would be a violation of this tenants and the owner's rights and guaranteed under the First Amendment. Also, there appears to be some difficulty, in my estimation, too, with some due process guarantees that are also required by our Constitution. And in that fact is that the terminology that is used currently in the Athens zoning code is vague and ambiguous. And I think that the board should be mindful of guaranteeing the due process rights of this user and not just arbitrarily assign definitions that would prohibit this use based solely on content regulation. Even if this were deemed to be a nightclub, there still would appear to be, enough parking spaces for, if you do the square footage computation. Is there any questions that I can answer? Yes.
Yeah, my question is with respect to, again, the parking spaces. The nature of this program that you have in there, is it like a fixed amount of time people will be there and then they all leave and a new group comes in, or is it ongoing process, because that changes the parking space,
I believe it would be an ongoing process.
Ongoing?
I'm not aware of any plans to have a 7 o'clock show and an 8 o'clock show.
Okay.
Like that.
All right.
It strikes me as a bit unusual to have fixed seats in something that might be somewhat similar to a nightclub with people bringing their own bottles, sitting around talking, and you have a chair that you can't move, as I do tonight. Well, actually, I can move my chair. So an assembly hall where people would be expected to sit in their places without moving, as in a church or a courthouse or a place like that, fixed seats seem reasonable. This seems quite odd to me to talk about fixed seats in a situation with dancing and drinking and...
Well, the patrons are not going to be dancing.
I understand
So
that.
the customers are not going to be dancing.
I quite understand that.
And
But
I
it's
think
still odd. If you went to a club, you wouldn't expect to be in a situation like in a schoolroom where your desk was clamped to the floor, would you?
Well, I think the purpose,
Just in passing, just an oddity of the application, it seems to me. And
I think there's a couple of reasons for that.
Yeah.
One of which is, that there are specific state statutes that have been recently enacted about, the distance that you can maintain from an entertainer and a
Right.
patron. And so the process of putting in the fixed seating sort of protects the owner that. We're hoping that will protect.
Protects the
and
owner in what
relieve
way?
that buffer zone.
How does this protect the owner?
Well, so we don't have seats up into our dead zone and into the areas where there could be touching or where they could violate that 6-foot zone.
Okay.
So you're saying fixed seating like a movie theater, fixed seating, or, I mean...
It would be more like booths.
Booths.
Yeah, that's what's planned.
Okay.
You also mentioned that people can bring their own drinks, perhaps. Is that includes like alcoholic beverages?
That's what they would like to do, yes, sir.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions that I can answer?
Maybe not at the moment.
right,
We
thank you.
probably will have more later. I'm just
Thank you
trying
very
to
much.
count the number of letters. I don't know how many, there must be 50 letters here.
Maybe Steve can answer that.
Okay. Is there anyone present who would like to speak in favor of this application? Or in general comment? Steve?
Clarification on the parking. I'm sorry that I didn't add that in my original comments. There are approximately 52 parking spaces there now. There is the possibility of adding about 4 more if the awning's taken off the front of the building.
Okay.
So, but let's just say we're in the range of about 50. There's a parking lot across the street there's a lot with this property across the street from the pharmacy. It's 60 feet wide, which is a sufficient width to have what they call double-loaded parking.
What does that mean?
Pardon me?
Can you explain that?
What's double-loaded parking?
It's called double-loaded parking, where you have entrance, exit, and then cars parked perpendicular. So you
I
got a
see.
20-foot stall, 2 10-foot passing lanes, and another 20-foot stall.
So that's pretty much the way it's set up now?
Yes.
Okay.
Of that area that I just alluded to, there is signage there that says 6 of the parking spaces are reserved for the pharmacy. So there's 6 off, so let's just work with 50, let's say.
And so we're talking about parking around back? Where, because, is that where there would be more parking around the back of the building?
Right. If you remember when New to You was there, they had a drop-off door at the back.
Correct.
And you could drive around the side of the building, and there was kind of like angled parking right there. Given a 9-foot stall width minimum, there are about 17 parking spaces then that could go along beside the building all the way back toward the roller bowl. And then there's some parking in front of the building, and then there's enough room in the back because the lift was taken out from when the auto repair place was there that used to block off being able to maneuver right there. There's area back there for more parking.
Okay, so you're saying that these, 50 spaces would all be used for the Assembly Hall nightclub?
Well, right now,
Whatever it
4
is.
spaces are needed for the, I think it's an auto customizing place right now. The code talks about automobile or machinery sales and service garages, 1 for every 800 square feet. So the area that they occupy requires about 4 parking spaces. There's also been a permit approved to use the front part of the building right up at the corner for a car sales facility. It would fall under the same category, automobile sales, and it would require, I can't remember exactly, but it's 3 or 4. Let's just use the high end. 4 in the back, 4 for the auto dealership that's in the corner, and then I don't know what to do with, I'm just pointing out
Okay, so
that it's signed for 6 then of additional spaces to be used at the pharmacy.
okay, so we're down to about 42 spaces then, right?
6, 12, 4, 14,
In the pa-
40, 46.
The spaces
Excuse me, no.
on Palmer Street, would those be redesigned, or, because do they meet code? Don't they come
The
over?
parking
to-
on Palmer Street is public parking, can't be counted toward the use, and is not
Oh, okay.
included in
All
my
right.
my total count.
All right.
Okay. Is there at this time anybody present who'd like to speak in favor of this business moving in? Is there anyone present who would like to speak against it? All right. If you would like to, if you would come to the podium, please, and... Yes, I don't think she has, so we will have to do that. Ma'am, I believe you may have arrived after we had already done the swearing in.
Somebody else
No,
might have been here to
please.
speak before me.
No, swear in.
You're welcome to speak. It's just that I think you weren't sworn in, so I need to swear you in.
Okay.
Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
So help me God.
And would you state your name and address for the record, please?
Francine Childs, 25 Elliott Street.
Thank you.
You said no more than 2 minutes.
Oh, please.
Okay. I would first of all like to start by asking a question. Is this a back door entrance to the strip club?
I think it is a strip club.
I think he's
That's
been
the
pretty clear.
objective.
It's a strip club.
Okay. Exotic dancing, strip
I
club.
think that's what an exotic
Okay,
dancing
that's
is.
what-
It's a strip
that-
club.
okay, that's what- okay.
I mean, a strip club.
All right, so,
Pardon me.
okay. I guess the first thing I would like to say is that this seems to be problematic.
Could you adjust the mic?
Yes. Okay, I can't hardly see what I've written down. I think this will bring a bad element to the community. It is within a close proximity of where I live, and I know some people who are much older than me that lives within a block of where this is going to be. I think it's too close to the schools. And I think that it will bring a bad element, and I do not believe we have enough police force. Our police force is not adequate enough to perhaps handle what is likely to follow a club such as this. So I vehemently oppose such a club in this particular location. Now, if they want to take it outside of the city someplace, that's their business. But in this proximity, it's close to. There's a bank there. There are other businesses there, and thinking about the new building that's coming up for students, I think we have enough problems already. And to bring such a club like this to our community will take away what we have been known for as one of the best cities, the best known small towns in the United States, and the sense of community and camaraderie that we have here, and to bring such a club like this to our neighborhood, I think would be a discredit to our community and all of its citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak this evening?
My name is Bick Weissenreeder, 3 Hillcrest Drive. I have already sworn.
I spend a lot of time at 7 West Stimson Avenue. Hocking Valley Bank is my employer. Vehement was the word that Dr. Childs used. I would have to reiterate that from our perspective, that this type of use for that property is totally out of character with what's going on in the rest of the neighborhood. There's been a fair amount of money and effort spent by different property owners in the neighborhood to upgrade the property, to make it better, to make it more presentable. I think earlier, Muriel, you commented on does granting the variance cause detriment to anyone? Well, I can flat promise you that having that across the street from us will cause detriment to our values. So I didn't want to not say anything because I certainly didn't want to leave the impression that we were indifferent to this. So I really hope you turn this down.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who has an opinion to state?
Yes,
Please.
Excuse me, I was sworn earlier. I'm Glenn Matlack. I have a house at 35 Morris Avenue, which I share with my family, including 2 young children. We are slightly beyond 100 feet from the property in question. We're somewhere around 180, I would guess. But from our back windows, we can easily see, with the leaves off the trees, the property in question. And I've already had to answer questions from my grade school children as to what a strip club is, what do people do there, why are people excited about it, and it is not fun answering those questions. I'm a little surprised at the discussion as to the definition of this under the law. Is this an assembly room? Is this a club? Is this an entertainment venue? It seems to me that the definition is quite clear, and that when the people who originally formed those codes, whenever they wrote them, were not thinking of a strip club when they framed it in those terms. And city code recognizes this sort of establishment and is quite explicit about it. In section 130511, the Athens City Code states, and I quote, "No person shall create, direct, or produce an obscene performance when the offender knows that such material is to be used for commercial exploitation or will be publicly presented." I move down the paragraph slightly, and I quote, "No person shall advertise an obscene performance for presentation or present or participate in presenting an obscene performance when such performance is presented publicly or when admission is charged." So it's pretty clear, at least to me, that this use runs against established city code. There seems to be no ambiguity. This is, as the lady pointed out, the first example of this in Athens that I know of. There's a real danger of creating a precedent here. This is not, in my mind, where we want the city to go. I'd also like to speak to the parking issues. As one of you said, it occurs to me that the parking on Homer Street is in fact city property. That's a city right-of-way. I'm worried that if we grant the variance to the club to use that as parking, that will create a precedent for private businesses using city rights-of-way, which are scattered all over the town, for parking, which is not something we want to see happening, I think. I'm also aware that the owner of the property has applied to the state for use of this property as a used car lot. I think the official category is luxury car lot. I'm not sure what that means, but it's essentially a used car lot. And the vision that I got from reading the paper about this is that there would be one business in one part of the building, the other business in the other part of the building. Now, car lots, by their nature, use a lot of parking. You have to line up the cars in an attractive way. And that parking space would eat into these parking spaces that Mr. Pearson described. I'm very much afraid that the parking demanded by the club would overlap the parking demanded by the used car lot, and in fact, parking would, in a practical sense, spill out into the surrounding neighborhoods. In the surrounding neighborhoods on one side is the student neighborhood toward Mill Street, and on the other side, not very far away, is Morris Avenue, a family neighborhood, many elderly citizens, and a school. And as the police will tell you, this sort of businesses are accompanied by a high incidence of rowdiness, public drunkenness, and various sorts of crime, and I really don't want that spilling over into my neighborhood. In a larger sense, this seems to me to set the tone for the development of Stimson Avenue. Stimson Avenue is at a turning point. Several long-established businesses have folded, unfortunately. We're looking at redevelopment in the area. When a developer comes, potential developer comes and looks at it, what they want to put there will be determined to some extent by what they see there. If they see carefully thought out commercial development, prospering businesses, restaurants, small shops with lodging, that will direct their minds in one way. If they see vacant lots, a car lot, a strip club, that will direct their minds in another direction. Okay? I don't think we want to go in that other direction. It seems to me that the decision of the Zoning Board of Appeals tonight has the potential to direct development on Stimson one way or the other for a long time into the future, and I would strongly encourage you to vote against this. Thank you.
Thank you. Who else would like to speak this evening? Is there someone else who'd like to speak?
I'm Debbie Phillips. I live at 48 Hudson Avenue. I'm a member of Athens City Council. You all know that we have been considering and are working through the process to amend some ordinances relating to businesses of this nature. Obviously, those would affect any future proposals and not one that is currently under consideration. But one of the things that I think is relevant is in that process, we've been made aware of a lot of the information about the secondary effects of this type of activity. And while the activity is constitutionally protected and your decision can't really be based on the content of that activity, I think it's perfectly legitimate to consider the secondary effects. One of the examples that was provided to us was a newspaper article about a shooting at a similar facility in Columbus where 2 people were killed in 2006, and that was a facility that was a bring your own beverage kind of operation. So there is documentation of negative secondary impacts of these kinds of businesses that I think would be legitimate for you to consider. I would also refer as well to the comprehensive plan and the corridor plan for Stimson Avenue, which many people in the community had an opportunity to weigh in on. That has been approved by the Planning Commission and by City Council. So I think as you're considering the general character of activities allowed in the zone, we have some indication to guide us as to what the community expects to see happening there. And I'm aware that some of the property owners along that corridor are very interested in moving forward, in working toward that vision for that corridor. So, in addition to looking at the secondary impacts and the fact that it is close to an elementary school in a residential neighborhood, that those are things we can be concerned about. We also do have some guidance about what's planned for that area. And I also am aware that the property owner has several other options that are being considered for this property. There's a recent application that's been made, and I spoke with him earlier today, and I think that we do have the opportunity to move toward a more appropriate use of that property in that zone.
Well, and it's not the property owner who's making this application this evening. It's a business that would like to rent from the property owner. So, business could possibly rent from some other property owner someplace else also.
Yeah. So those are just a couple things that I wanted to mention. Also, as you're looking at the parking requirement, it looked like there were several options because this doesn't exactly fit anything in that table about the parking requirement. If it seems more like the use that requires one space per 100 square feet, then 4,800 square feet of public space would require more than the 40 or so spaces that seem to be available. So I'll just mention that as well.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. Is there anyone else this evening who has something to add? If not, I have several letters that we have approximately 50. Steve, did you ever count the letters? Do you know how many was in this file? A lot, but
when this became fairly well known to the public, I started receiving quite a few emails. I copied each one of those because I believe them to be a public record, informed the people who sent them to me that I was going to place it in the record, and then a very few actually written letters that came in. I would say, I don't know, maybe 50 emails and 15 letters.
Yeah.
And phone calls, I can't tell you how many hours of phone calls.
Well, we can't get those in the record, and obviously I can't read all of the letters. But there's a petition here with, I think, about 25 names on it.
Right. A lot of what you see in the record, too, is also people petitioning me, essentially, to refer this to the board. That's what a lot of those are about, and the majority of them are about. They're not. They do then describe their, I would say, their point of view on the particular use. But most of them start out asking me to to use that section of the code to refer the matter to the board. That's the bulk of them.
Well, the petition that we have here, and I guesstimated about 50 others, but then there's a petition with 24 names on it. Say, we, the undersigned, have concerns about the permitting of Stimson Avenue Gentlemen's Club. We feel there are numerous concerns that need to be addressed more fully in the public forum. Therefore, request that Steve refer this permit to the Athens Board of Zoning Appeals, and which he did. And I've selected a sampling of the letters from people who wrote in. One is dated recently, Tuesday, January 15. Not so recent. Dear Mr. Pearson, I have grave concerns about the potential gentlemen's club that's been proposed for the Stimson Avenue neighborhood. I believe it would make a significant negative statement about our community, particularly in its proximity to East Elementary School, the Senior Citizen Center, as well as the new apartment complex being constructed quite near the proposed site. I have no problem with such an establishment being built in some remote area from city residential communities, but I'm dead set against it in the center of town, and this was signed by Richard K. Bracken. Then another letter, also short so I can read it. I'm very concerned about the strip club being proposed for Stimson Avenue. This is a family neighborhood with elementary schools close by. In addition, this will ruin the comprehensive plan for the area, which would emphasize family and student retail stores and pedestrian traffic. Such stores will be less inclined to locate next to a strip joint. Please refer this case to the Board of Zoning Appeals. It needs more discussion, more chance for public input. This was June Holly on 8 Lincoln Street. And as an example of a longer letter, dated a lot of things. Oh, this was an email. January 15. Dear Mr. Pearson, I'm writing because I'm dismayed that the Near East neighborhood apparently is about to be graced with a gentleman's club on Stimson Avenue. I implore you to refer the permit decision to the Board of Zoning Appeals. The public deserves a chance to comment and formally state its complaints on a project that's certain to harm the neighborhood. Personally, my biggest objection is that a strip club has no place in a neighborhood full of young families. I have two children aged 4 and 8. I'm neither naive nor a prude, but I see no good reason why a strip club needs to be located within a few hundred feet of our home. Every other mom and dad I've spoken to feels the same way. Moreover, the project would be located among residential buildings and appallingly close to East Elementary School. Other cities, Cleveland for instance, regulate the placement of strip clubs by requiring them to be at least 1,000 feet from homes, schools, parks, playgrounds, daycares, etc. And she references a place to search. about Cleveland. This club will further hurt the neighborhood economically. Existing plans for upgrading Stimson would be strongly undermined. What new business or housing development would choose to be located next to a strip club? I don't know if property values for homeowners would be depressed, and that's not my chief concern, but it does appear to be another possible effect. Other impacts include the potential for increased crime and disorderly conduct in the immediate vicinity of the club. This would put increased demands on our already strained public safety system. There well may be a market for a strip club in Athens, but honestly there are very good reasons that in other cities that have strip clubs, they're located at the edge of town or at least far from residential areas. This would be a far more appropriate solution for Athens as well. If the developer wants to maintain cordial relations with the community, he would be well advised to look into alternative, less central locations. I ask you to please ensure that Zoning Board of Appeals gets involved in this process. Athens deserves development that will enhance the community, the quality of life for all of its residents, not degrade it while putting cash in the pockets of a few well-heeled individuals. Many thanks for your time and consideration. This was sincerely Patricia Stokes, 67 Morris Avenue, which is very close by. And let's see, there's one other of the many, but this one is, it has come to my attention that the zoning board is considering the approval of a strip club in my neighborhood. Presently, the east side is a quiet neighborhood, conducive to raising children, a quality that's always made Athens a wonderful place to live. They have a tremendous responsibility because their decisions shape the type of community we will have in future. I guess referring to the zoning board. A strip club in the middle of a neighborhood. If I'm a person of character looking for a place to move my family, it's not going to be to a neighborhood with a strip club. You can say gentleman's club, but a rose is a rose by any other name. I would not want my children to grow up thinking this type of entertainment is family-oriented. It's a business that will only appeal to a certain type of individual, not a whole family. They will be responsible for their decision, but once done, it'll be difficult to undo, so they must ask themselves, what will the strip club bring to this neighborhood? How will this strip club advance the neighborhood? How will this strip club benefit the east side? How will this strip club facilitate the raising of children? How will this strip club facilitate the growth of young people into responsible adults? How will this strip club turn away respectable business and respectable people? How little do I care about the people living in Athens? How little do I care about the families living in the East Side neighborhood? With this approval, the East Side families are forgotten and the children discarded. With this approval, the quality and safety of the neighborhood is compromised for the good of no one. So in the final analysis, the decision is theirs. Are they going to turn Athens into a trash town, or will they allow Athens to remain a respectable town of higher education? I support this Board of Appeals at using their power to assure the zoning board makes the right decision. This was Sally Heron of 35 Meadow Lane. This one seems a bit content-oriented. I got started and I didn't stop. The ones that, anyway, let's see, the one on May Avenue, Tonga Cox?
We did a good sample.
That is a representative sample. Some of them were like that. And I do also have one from the superintendent of schools, which was down, the next one down.
From the principal of the
East Elementary. The superintendent and the principal basically said similar things. So as a superintendent of the Athens City School District, I'm writing this letter in regards to the above referenced business, the 3-wide entertainment business that has been issued, that hasn't been issued a permit, I guess he thought it was. An article in the Athens News Monday, January 14, outlined a request for a permit to open a private club of dancing and entertainment in the building. As the representative for the school district, I feel the application for an adults-only gentlemen's club on the reference site should be referred to the Board of Zoning Appeals for review and public comment. Please consider the impact this type of business on Stimson Avenue will have on the local community of the Near East Side. I believe such a business could be detrimental to the safety and welfare of the children in nearby residential neighborhood and those attending East Elementary School. I also believe this type of business will be harmful to future economic development along Stimson Avenue. Given the many needs of our community and the diminished availability of land and buildings for good economic development, this type of business should not be allowed to occupy such a precious resource. I sincerely hope you will send this matter to the Board of Zoning Appeals in order for the local community to give a voice in the use of their resources. And then I might as well find the one from Dana Boger. As the principal of East Elementary, I'm writing this letter in regard to the 3-wide entertainment application for zoning certificate 07250 on 9 and 13 East Stimson Avenue. An article in the Athens News Monday, January 14, outlined a request for a permit to open a private club with dancing and entertainment in the building. I feel the application for an adults-only gentlemen's club on the above site should be referred to the Board of Zoning Appeals for review and public comment. Please consider detrimental to the safety and welfare of the students and children attending East Elementary, harmful to future economic development of Stimson Avenue. And I think now that really that is very representative of the other letters which we have received. Is there any other commentary from the floor? From Steve? From anyone else?
You've got a question for me. I'm going to have to talk about some things if I'm going to vote on this.
Well, absolutely. That's the next thing we're going to do, but I just want to make sure that everyone in the
Do you want
public...
Mr. Morgenthaler first, before we talk about that stuff?
Yeah, as soon as I'm sure that
I
every...
want to ask
yeah.
some people some questions, if I may.
Would Mr. Morgenthau be one of them? Because he gets an opportunity. I would like him to have an opportunity to say something.
I just want to get this in before you close the floor
I'm
and
not
start
closed.
talking among
I
yourselves.
haven't closed anything
Good.
yet. Okay. Mr. Morgenthau, would you like to say anything additional?
Yes, thank you. I would like to address some of the concerns that were voiced today.
Okay.
First off is, and I hope I don't get names wrong, I tried to write down as fast as I could, Mr. Matlack's concerns that this use would somehow violate the criminal code sections that are embodied in Athens code. And there was a morals and decency code that outlined certain criminal offenses, one of which would be pandering obscenity. And I can assure this board and Mr. Matlack that whatever goes on in that establishment will not meet the definition of obscenity as it's been handed down, from time and time by the courts of the United States and the state of Ohio. And so we're not, there are going to be no criminal offenses that are going to be violated inside this building. Ms. Phillips, Councilperson Phillips, is correct in when you're enacting legislation such as I believe the city's in the process of doing that would put prior restraint upon this adult entertainment establishments, you are able to consider those issues like secondary effects, the crime that it may be speculative at best that this use would create. The reports of killing up in Columbus and all that kind of stuff, you are allowed to consider those secondary effects in enacting this ordinance and in supporting the regulation of this ordinance. But there is no ordinance at this juncture that would regulate this type of behavior. And so I think that it would be improper for the board to base their decision as to whether or not to grant this initial use permit based upon the speculation that there may be some crime that would be increased or because of the use of this property. And so I would just like to reiterate that this is a first time request for this use. We're not talking about a variance. We're talking about, is this use in conformity with the zoning code as it is enacted in December of 2007? And I believe that our point was that if you call it an assembly hall, which it is, if you call it a club, which it is, if you call it a entertainment, which it certainly is, then all those uses can be at this location. And the parking is more than adequate for any of those assembly hall uses, for the club use, and for the entertaining use. Just one other issue, I guess, is that I know there is a public outcry about this use. And I'm really not here to say one way or the other that this is a good activity that goes on there or a bad activity that goes on there. But take, for instance, let's say, pick a religion, a Baptist church. wanted to go into an area that's zoned for church, okay, are you going to listen to, a community full of Catholics that doesn't want a Baptist church in their community? I mean, saying that, our religion's the only one, Baptists aren't, the particular religion that we want in our community, you would certainly never deny that application based upon the content of the speech that's going on in that Baptist church, and based upon the outcry from the Catholic community that they don't want Baptists in. Now, I'm not casting aspersions upon Catholics or Baptists, I'm just using that as an example, but that's clearly what would go on here if this board would deny this permit. It is a applicable use under your code, and if you were to abide by the wishes of the residents of Athens that have stood here tonight or sent you letters and emails, then what you're doing is you're regulating this use based solely upon the content of the speech that's happening there. And you might want to talk to your law director if you have not already. He may be in the room tonight, maybe he wants to weigh in on this, but there's certainly constitutional prohibitions that would weigh heavily against such a decision. So we'd like you to consider that in granting this application for zoning. Thank you.
We all know that we can't consider the kind of activity. We're not regulating. We're not going to be regulating obscenity or anything like that. We are all aware of that, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. We're not going to be getting into any protected speech issues here because that's not what we've been asked to do. But do we have any kind of guidance that we should be having other than that we want to be considering what this...
See, that's what I would like Mr. Lang to provide for me, is why I'm dealing with a request use, whether or not it's principally permitted. It seems to me my legal department ought to be able to provide me with that information and not put it on my back.
Yeah.
Well...
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, are you...
Please, I am interested in any kind of guidance you can give us as to what we can consider here, what kinds of uses. I mean, I don't think it... Well, anyway, go on.
Much like all of us, I mean, tonight's really the first time that we've had a specific, having someone come forward with specifics as to what, is being proposed for this use. And so, given that fact, I think it's appropriate that... it would ultimately be, the responsibility of myself and my office to represent the city should any legal challenges come as a result of any actions that would be taken by this board or by any other city board or city council. So I think it's appropriate for me to be somewhat measured in the advice that I give here this evening. That said, it would be nice if we had a straightforward legal definition of exactly what constitutes a use that would be in the same general character of a principally permitted use, but that's ultimately what this board is empowered to decide under the code. We have 12 delineated specific things that are principally permitted uses for a B3 zone. And then we have this line which is being evoked here this evening for those things that are not specifically put out in the code as permitted uses, but are not specifically prohibited for that. And so I think that as obviously as Madam Chair, as you said, clearly whatever decision this board should make tonight is not going to be based upon the First Amendment protected sorts of speech, and it's not going to address an issue that was raised earlier about due process. I don't necessarily think that we're dealing with a situation that is overly vague. I think that the language is what it is, which is to say that this board, which is comprised of members of the community, is empowered to determine whether what you've heard here tonight, whether this proposal is something that would be considered to be in the same general character of other things that are allowed. And so that's kind of where we're at, and that's what the code empowers us to do here tonight.
And were we to determine that it is similar to something that's in the code, would it be something that would be within our jurisdiction to determine that in the interest of preserving quality of life for the area, in the interest in preserving the health and welfare of children, in the interest of ensuring the future development of the neighborhood can be pursued as planned, to indicate that this would be a business that was better done in another location than this one.
Madam Chair, I think we're limited to determining what,
whether or not this is
within those parameters of a B3 zone. I think that's kind of the universe that we're dealing with here tonight is, given the information that's been presented to this board, do we feel that that is something that is of the same general character of other permitted uses for this zone specifically?
Okay, and that's what we have to, so.
But they're asking for a permit to engage in dancing and entertainment. So who's to say what the nature of the entertainment is? Us?
No, he's already been told that
No,
by
we
the
don't
appellant's
determine
attorney.
anything about the nature
He's
of the
already told
entertainment.
I'm just asking for dancing and entertainment.
He's told us that it's a strip club.
Well, no, again, I don't think we've got a specific definition. I mean, that's, as Director Pearson said earlier, the reason that it's here before the board tonight is because it doesn't fit neatly into one of those boxes that has been laid out in the code as being allowable for this zone. But by the same token, there's nothing that comes out and directly says that something like this is not allowed. I think that there are certainly elements of it that you could say, are there elements of, of an assembly hall or elements of a club, but it's not it's certainly not a clear-cut issue, which is why it fell under that exception for, principally permitted uses, and that's why
We have to decide whether a strip club is the same thing as a bingo hall.
Right.
Basically.
whether it's of a similar character.
Or a bank or a post office or the other kinds of things that are permitted in the in that
grocery store.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, again, just taking into account the information that you've been presented with tonight about the what's being proposed for the use on this site, is that of the same general character of other things that are specifically allowed in a B3?
Because of the nature of the 120 seats that are fixed in building of 9,000 square feet, is that the sort of thing that we're to be comparing with when we try to decide whether this is the same thing as an assembly hall?
I don't think the language of the code gives us any clear direction on that. I think that the language, again, there's not a straightforward answer to that in the code.
Okay.
And that's why I'm uncomfortable with it.
Mr. Lang, so basically we need to define if it's a dance hall, dance, or entertainment, and then from there we can decide what is parking.
Well,
That's the
parking-
boundaries.
Yeah, parking.
Excuse
The
me.
parking is
It's another-
completely,
Excuse me.
yeah, separate.
Is that, so if we say it's a dance hall or a dancing and entertainment, then we have to look at the parking restrictions or the parking requirements, is that?
For purposes of the parking,
Yeah.
I would
For
defer.
purposes of this whole thing. We have to make a definition of, is this a dance hall?
No, I don't think you have to make a definition. I would disagree with that. I think, again, the question is just, is this of the same general character of these other issues? And then once we've cleared that threshold, then on the parking issues, that would be the second.
Once you figure out which thing it's similar to, then you decide,
Yes.
then you can figure out whether or not it has enough parking, the amount of parking that the thing that it's similar to would be required to have,
Correct.
would be what it would be required to have.
I believe that would be, the parking would be the second issue that would be addressed once.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so our job is to see, is this similar in
Nature.
in character and nature to what's currently in this.
And let's
in
just
this
go over those similar things that is mentioned in those 12 items: hospitals, animal shelters, animal clinics, building and printing trades, bottling works, contractors' yard, agricultural, farming activities. These are the activities that you can take your family in there, the neighborhood can go in there and have a use, be a benefit to the family. But this is not going to be similar because I don't think anybody in the neighborhood is going to be utilizing this facility, and you're not going to take your family in there. So that's where the similarity comes. The type of the businesses we are talking has a benefit to the immediate neighborhood, but I don't think this is going to have any impact on the is a benefit to the people in the neighborhood. So when we compare the similarity, those are the type of the items or activities that's mentioned in those 12 items.
From the B3 zone, B1?
Yeah, B3, yeah.
So if I want to vote against it, I would just have to say that this would involve immoral and criminal activities,
can't-
or
no, no,
at
no,
least
you can't- you can't vote-
encourage immoral
No, no,
or criminal
no.
activities.
You can't vote
No,
based on that at all.
neutral.
That has nothing to do with what we're being asked to vote.
That's what I keep
Well,
hearing.
okay,
That may
look
be
at
what
what's
you're
already
hearing.
there. Look what's in the neighborhood.
Let's talk about what's
There's a
there.
brand-new bank that just opened, within the last year. The Hocking Valley Bank has spent a great deal of money upgrading its facilities and expanding them. There's an attorney's office there. There are laundromats and
Chinese
the
restaurant.
post office and a restaurant and a couple of grocery stores, the pharmacy and the new market, or the
There's
little
one
market.
beer and
whatever it is.
liquor establishment.
Right, and a beer and liquor establishment which does not bring patrons who stay there for any purpose at all except to choose whatever beer or wine.
Just
they
saying what
want
I
to-
just said.
Right.
For immoral and criminal activities.
No.
But buying beer is criminal? No.
Well, the back
It's
door and the
not.
front door, it's
No.
what you're
I don't
talking
know.
about.
I think you need to look at what is this neighborhood like, and I'm talking only about Simpson Avenue as a general business area. But if you move 20 feet beyond it, you are in fact at a residential area. We're only talking about, as the code exists now, it says you can only be within 100 feet of a
I'm
particular
with you
R1 zone.
100%. But the
Okay,
heck of it
we're
is,
talking.
the code doesn't deal with that.
Yes, it does. In that, we are allowed to consider other uses that are not named here. You could say, well, it's a nightclub, but it's a nightclub with a difference, isn't it? You could say it's an assembly hall. I cannot, in my father's imagination, call this an assembly hall, because an assembly hall is where people go to discuss issues like, who shall we have for our local sheriff? Who wants to work for that
I certainly wouldn't be
entity?
comfortable making those definitions, but apparently
Well,
you
I'm
are.
speaking
No,
personally.
no, the
I'm
definitions
speaking
are already
personally.
in there, and that's
Okay.
what we're being asked to do tonight,
Right.
is to see if any of those definitions that
Apply
are in
to
the
this
code
place.
can be made to apply to the business application that is being presented here.
Is this similar in nature and character to what is presently on Stimson Avenue and in the larger area, which is very closely allied to this area, within 20 feet I'm talking about? Now, I'm going to read a couple of things. One is from a document that our former law director, Gary Hunter, gave us on municipal zoning, and on page 13, it refers to the power of the board, and this is somewhat redundant because you already know what your powers are, but it says the right of the individual to use and enjoy his property is not unbridled, but is subject to the legitimate exercise of the local police power, and in this case, that's us, since we are an extension of the local police power, which includes the power to impose zoning regulations to further the public safety, health, morals, or general welfare. And I think that is something of what we're talking about, the secondary effects. And our code does, well, at least this section, which is part of the Ohio Constitution,
And you're
Article
mentioning
13,
moral-
number 3,
moral, just what I was
does
saying
mention,
before.
okay, this is from the Ohio Constitution, Article 13, number 3, which says that we have the right to address that. And then here is a further rather lengthy and detailed statement from this same article. It's on, in my copy, it's on page 36, and it's titled "The Discretion of the Board." I hate to bore you with too much of this. And it's talking about variances specifically, and we're not being asked to grant a variance, but the effect would be the same, essentially, because it would give this property owner the right to use this property for a particular use, in this case, the exotic dancing club. It says, the determination of the question whether a variance should be granted is a matter within the sound and wide discretion of the Board of Zoning Appeals, and this refers to Menta Lagoons, Inc. versus Zoning Board of Appeals, et cetera, a particular case. In the absence of proof to the contrary, the board's decision in relation to a variance application will be presumed valid and reasonable. Again, a case is cited. This is Diebel versus Wilson. It will be nullified by a court only when the decision constitutes an abuse of the board's discretion. Again, a case is cited, Niethammer versus Heyer. Again, a case where it might be put aside. A use of power in excess of that granted to the board, again, another case is cited, or an unreasonable ruling under all circumstances. Then it goes on to say, as zoning regulations impose a variety of requirements upon the granting of a variance, the factors upon which a Board of Appeals may consider in relation to a variance application may not always be the same. However, the ordinances and enabling acts are sufficiently standard to permit some generalizations of these factors. And here's the point I want to make. It is clear that the board must, in the usual case, examine the unique circumstances of the applicant, the character of the neighborhood where the proposed use will be situated, the effect of the variant use on other property, the probable effect of proposed use on the area where it will be maintained, and the general effect upon health, safety, morals, and welfare of the community. See Spencer versus Board of Zoning Appeals, etc., etc., etc. In determining whether a variance should be granted, in this case a use rather than a variance, the board may consider the nuisance potential inherent in a particular use in relation to its surroundings, and a denial of the variance is not unreasonable when fairly prompted by such considerations. So it seems to me that we do have the right to consider some secondary effects, even with the code that we have currently in place, rather than simply speculating on what may be in an ordinance later on. That's all I want to say about that.
Okay. Does anybody have any additional questions for? Gone? I guess we've had our questioning.
Yeah, we did.
Do we understand then that what's at issue right now is whether or not this adults-only club can be compared to some where it's not in the code that it's permitted, but it's not in the code that it's not permitted, as in that description, whether or not it is a principally permitted use in B3 because it's like something that has been shown to be principally permitted use.
I hope I just said that it wasn't.
I think you did, but I just want to make sure that
Yeah,
okay. That's right.
we have some, that's what we're considering here.
It's not a bank, it's not a grocery store, it's not a post office, it's not a lawyer's office, it's not even a nightclub per se.
Well, it isn't, as far as I can, a nightclub is someplace where you,
This will be a club that meets at night, but it has a special, unique element that does have an effect, I think, on the economic development of the area and the character of the neighborhood.
And all of the uses that you've described, you've listed, are permitted uses. Is this like that? So, do we have any further discussion that we want to make?
Make a motion. And then go after that, huh? I move that the board, in case of 0803, in regard to the property at 11 and 13 West Stimson Avenue, represented by Tree White Entertainment, to consider whether or not the requested use is principally permitted in this B3 zone in accordance with sections 230407A and 230702C, with request for 42 parking spaces.
Well, shouldn't the parking spaces be something that is considered separately if we determine that this is, it would be...
If we say it's okay, then we can consider it.
If it is a principally permitted use, then the number of spaces will be of interest, but if it's not, then it just doesn't apply.
So just delete with the request for 42 parking spaces.
Okay, does anybody want, does that sound good? Somebody second it? Seconded.
And I would like to, before I say anything else, to say this. It's been pointed out that this is not the only location in Athens that might be considered for such a club, so we're not saying that there can be no such thing, because that's not our right to say. And we should also remember that the owner of this property, who is not the appellant tonight, has in fact already submitted architect's plan for a different use, and that plan has been passed on to the Planning Commission by Mr. Pearson, and they have already set a date to talk with Mr. Prokos about that plan on March 20th.
That shouldn't have anything to do with our decisions tonight about the use of the place.
Well, I think it does.
Well, I
You
think-
may have your opinion, I'll have mine.
Yeah, I think
Yes, I will.
it's information that's interesting, and you never want to restrict a person's use of his property
We were just talking about
unreasonably, yeah.
whatever's going on somewhere else that's not.
It's not somewhere else, it's the same
It's right
property.
here, it's his property. There are other uses
I
for
think
this
this number
property.
12 really says, any use determined by the BZA to be of the same general character. That's very clear that
I think
we
so.
need to look at this. This is not the same general character as all those items mentioned in the first 12 items. So that's basically...
What bothers me as much as anything is that when I got on this board, I was under the impression I was going to be dealing with variances.
Well,
Well, it's
we
not the
have
only thing
other
we do,
things to
though.
All of
consider.
a sudden, I find I'm not
We
dealing with a variance.
do use permits, we do conditional uses, we do
I'm
reviews.
comfortable with variances,
Interpretation.
but I'm not
But that's not
comfortable
the
with some
only
of
thing,
these
that's
other
not the only thing that we're required to do. That's what was one of the things in the opening statement that we read every time. It lists the other things that we are in.
We are occasionally asked to review something that the code executive has passed on to us, or even to interpret whether he's made a decision that is fair and equitable.
The board is also empowered to hear and decide applications for conditional use, substitutions for non-conforming use, temporary uses, appeals where it's alleged the appellant, there's an error in the decision made by the zoning administrator, and requests for interpretation of the code, which is what we're doing tonight, is interpreting it.
So let's get on.
Okay, so
I did.
it's been
Seconded.
moved and it's been seconded, and is there any further discussion before we decide to vote?
We always continue to come back to exactly what you keep saying, Mr. Golson, which is what's in the area, what's the other development, what are the other businesses?
Yep. Okay, well,
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, could I just please clarify what exactly the motion that's on the table right now is?
the motion is to
You want me to read it
grant the
again?
request.
You want me to read it?
Oh, yeah, would you?
I move that the board, in case of 0803, in regard to the property at 11 and 13 West Simpson Avenue, represented by 3 White Entertainment, to consider whether or not the requested use is principally permitted in this B3 zone in accordance with sections 230407A and 230702C.
Are we needing approval or not?
We're moving for approval. We always move in the affirmative. That doesn't necessarily imply anything.
Actually, I said whether or not, so we are
When
considering.
I read mine, my remark was that we would consider granting.
Yes.
And I feel very comfortable with consider rather than recommend.
I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page.
Yeah,
Are we?
and it was seconded and discussed. And I think we're ready to vote. Roger, would you like to vote first?
No.
Okay, John?
No.
Would you, oh, you're not? No. And I also vote no. It doesn't seem to fit any of the requirements. So, then, we have one other thing we have to do this evening. Determine whether or not, has everyone read the minutes from the last meeting?
Yes.
Yes, I move that we accept them as presented.
Second.
In favor, everyone?
Aye.
Okay, in which case, adjourned.